5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Not a bad-looking day out there. Kathy Burns is on the phone. She's the author of a new book called SHLEP. SHLEP, as you know. You ever schlep something up the stairs? I schlep stuff. Right?
Yes.
Schlep stuff. When I help somebody move, right?
Yeah.
You're schlepping stuff. I was schlepping stuff all week last week.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Heavy stuff, too. I don't want to make light of it. Kathy bears her soul in this book. She's obviously gone through...
She's amazing.
Not the easiest of times and tried to get an apartment in L.A., and you know how that is. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to... No wonder there's so many people sleeping in tents in L.A., Robin.
Yeah.
We saw people sleeping in tents last week when we were out there. Soul searching is the S. Homeseeking is the H. Liberating is the L. Equestrian party is the EP.
Yes.
Now that last part sounds pretty good. An equestrian party. Dancing horses. I can go for that. Kathy Burns is an artist, a survivor of marital abuse. You'll find out in a second what that's about. She's an owner of a herd of horses, an inspirational writer, and just a joy to read. Now we're going to speak to her. Kathy Burns, it's an honor to have you on the show. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing there?
I'm good here. Where are you calling from?
I'm in California. I'm up in the mountains in California.
Where? What? Like outside of L.A.?
It's about 2 hours north of Los Angeles.
2 hours north. Okay. Yeah, Rob and I were there last.
An area called Tehachapi. It's up about 4,500 feet.
How did you end up there?
You would never believe that you're that close to a city. It's very remote.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah, we were just there last week, and it's amazing how you go from the metropolitan area to the desert in like no time.
Oh yeah, I can get to the middle of the desert in about 20 minutes. Yeah, it's freaky. There's so many different climates in California.
So your story starts in the book anyway, late in life. Tell me what happened.
The trip I took started when I was 59 years old, and I'd been married for 23 years. And finally, after way too long of sticking to it, I decided to file for divorce and found myself in an emotionally desperate place. My therapist said it was PTSD. It was like, I felt like somebody had actually done brain surgery and tampered with the wires in my brain. I couldn't think clearly. All our assets were frozen for the course of the four-year-long, which turned out to be 4-year-long divorce process. And I couldn't afford to live in Los Angeles anymore. My youngest child went off to college, and I felt like I wasn't needed in the area 24/7. And my therapist, when I had mentioned her, I felt like just running away and riding my horse in every state till I found a place that I could afford to live. She perked up and she said, "I think that would be therapeutic. You can't help your kids in the state you're in. You need to get better." So I looked at it like a shortcut to therapy.
Really?
And I did it. I'd never gone horse camping before. I'd never even owned a truck before. My dad completely supported the idea. He'd watched my decline. He was my biggest supporter all through my life. He was my rock. And he financed the rig. He paid for my hay and my gas. I paid him back later. But, yeah, so I had a couple of really enthusiastic support people in place that this is not just a crazy idea. You should do it.
That's a pretty good thing to have support people. So how long did your therapy last? Let me put it that way. How long did it last?
I was on the road for 13 months, so just a little over a year. I had planned on being on the road for a year, but it took a little bit longer.
So when you were on the road, I mean, you also not only had to care for yourself, but for your horse as well. And you said that you, through the riding the horse in mostly every state, you were able to sort through your feelings and get a better grip on life.
Yeah, so much happened in that 13 months. There was still a whole bunch of conflict going on in my personal life with the divorce and with my father having cancer and my mother having cancer and my dog having cancer. But And then just the physical journey of being busy. I was so busy. There was so much physical exertion involved with the journey itself, the physical journey. It kind of took my mind off of all of my problems. Am I going to end up homeless? Am I going to ever get my sanity back? Because I truly felt insane when I started the trip, and I thought I was ruined for good. But over the course of the time, there were lots of factors that helped heal my brain and gave me hope for a better future. And probably the most important of those was the women that I met along the way in each state. They inspired me. They would share their stories of heartache and pain and traumas that they'd gone through and how they'd come out on the other side. And they were inspired by my physical journey, which to me was like, oh, this is no big deal compared to getting over emotional problems. But so it was a two-way street. And then halfway through the journey, these women also were praying for me, something that had never really happened in my life. No one had ever asked me that question, can I pray for you, before. And when I got to Florida, I stayed there for a while to see my dad. I started going to church, and I got baptized there. So that was the real, that flipped the switch for me at that point, and things started getting better after that.
One of the things I've noticed in mostly you ladies, I guess it could be opposite too, but it's not. I think there's abuse, and then there's intentional or unintentional abuse. You know what I mean? And one of the unintentional abuses that men do to women, I think, is that they pursue their career, and they don't recognize that their wives also have a talent and a passion and a dream to pursue something. And the wife often sacrifices her own so that he can have his. And I'm not saying that anybody's doing the wrong thing. I'm just saying that seems to be the way it works out a lot of times. Was that part of your story too? Because you had so much talent as a painter and so much talent in other ways. Were you, and I'm not, your husband's name was Bob, right? Am I remembering right? Bob?
Yeah.
Was it Bob? And he, now you can tell me more than I know, obviously, but did he, in some way, without intending to, prevent you from pursuing whatever passion you had?
I don't know if anything that he did to me was malicious or intentional in like a devious, evil way. But I think more that he has some problems himself and just didn't see anybody else's pain around him. Everything, he was so self-focused. When we got married, I was a very successful businesswoman. I made more money than he did, and I supported his efforts in getting another company after his company failed. But at some point, when my youngest was 2 years old, he wanted to move to California to get this company, and I supported that. But there was no way that I could transfer my existing business to moving to California. And I said, I made a deal. I'll lend you the money to do this if I can stay home with the kids. And at that point, that move to California, which actually our marriage counselor had told me privately that if I followed him to California, he would kill me. That was the big change in our relationship. When I quit working, I was no longer the money cow. And I was more like an indentured servant, and I was treated horribly. Whether that was malicious or not, I can't say. I struggle with using the word abuse. My therapist insists that that's what it was. All I know is that I ended up at the end very damaged. And
not to be a therapist myself, but were you being encouraged in the things that you loved?
No, when I got into horses, that was when I got into horses. We moved to California. I started riding with my middle son because he loved horses so much, and my husband was not supportive of that endeavor at all. It was almost like anything that I liked to do was a problem for him. He said he was allergic to the paint fumes from my studio. Whatever. It's seemed like, to me, anything that I enjoyed was criticized. Criticism.
Throughout your journey, I mean, what made you and your sister become estranged, and how did your journey help you reunite with her?
The kids had suffered from living with the two of us and fighting like we were fighting. I fought back. Well, I wasn't just a doormat, but so they, that's toxic for kids to live in that environment. And I think that they were, because they didn't see all of it. You try to do some of this in private. I don't know that they blamed one or the other. And when I was the one that filed for divorce and moved out, they just looked at it like I was abandoning them. And none of them wanted to stay living with him. My daughter quickly realized that she was the first to come around. She moved out and she moved in with me in my little apartment in Pasadena. But during the course of SHLEP, she was the one that caused me so much angst, because she would call me crying, "When are you coming home? I can't stay with Dad," stuff like that. So I had a lot of guilt about it still, but I knew that I couldn't come back until I could function a whole lot better, because I wanted to be an example, particularly to her, of a strong woman and how a strong woman can survive and recover. So it was important to me to wait until I was done.
I'm looking at Amazon. The book is getting 5-star reviews and practically completely across the board with everybody who's read the book and written a review for you. Can you, let's be fair to the book. I want to be sure that the listeners know it's called SHLEP, SHLEP, Finding Healing on a Horseback in the Lower 48. So the therapeutic story that we read about, give us a thumbnail sketch of that story. What state did you start in? I'm assuming California, right?
I started in California. I did it basically in 3 what I call legs. I first headed up to Idaho to somebody that I knew that would promised to help me learn how the workings on the trailer work, because I'd never had a trailer before, a living quarters trailer. And then from there I headed down to Florida where my father was. He'd been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I wanted to spend some time with him because I didn't know how much longer he had.
Where?
And then the next leg was heading up to New Jersey, because at that point, then my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and it was happening fast. And so I got up to New Jersey. I spent 6 weeks there with her, and she died. And then the next part of the journey, my sister, who was in New Jersey, who has a lot of emotional problems and was very depressed, I offered her to come with me. And she picked up the last leg with me. She was with me, well, not the entire thing. At one point she fell off and broke some ribs and went home. But she joined back up with me, and she found the whole journey very inspiring. She was able to pick herself up out of the depression just by the physical activity, being outdoors more, hiking with my dog, stuff like that.
And that's what purpose is. I mean, because sometimes people, I know I've raised two children, and they're all married with their families of their own and everything. And then once, that happens, sometimes you feel, both the mom and the dad feel like there is no more purpose in life. And then it's painstaking to find something else to fill your life with a purpose. Yes,
the purpose is key to sanity, in my opinion. That was one of the scenes in the book's talks. I ran into a homeless woman before I even had the idea of SHLEP. But a homeless woman in the park that was sobbing, "What do I do? What do I do?" And it was the same question that I had been asking myself and having panic attacks over. What do I do now? Like, my life is like gone. What do I do now? I'd never really not had a purpose. When I was a businesswoman, I had drive, I had a million things I had to do every day. And then when I had kids, that's like, just doubled the purpose.
Right.
And all of a sudden, no kids, no job, no home, and it's like the ground is pulled out from under you. It's a horribly unsettling feeling.
So where did you come in Florida?
I boarded the horses in Jupiter Farms.
Oh, Jupiter.
My dad lived in Jupiter in Admiral's Cove.
Okay, because we have a big horse
during that
community.
trip, I also went up to Mayo for a TV show horseback ride that they had up there.
I'm not sure where
And I
that
rode all the canals around Jupiter Farms. I met a lot of really. You got a nice big party crowd down there.
So tell me what you do. So you would drive the horses in the trailer until you got to a certain location, and then how long would you stay in each location?
The original plan was a week in each state. And some states would take me 2-3 days to get between. I'd have like little overnights and meet some really interesting people at those overnights on between states too. That whole plan got kind of messed up when I got to Florida, because my dad was sick. It was the holidays, and there was something called a polar vortex in the country.
Oh, yeah.
Right, got cold.
Literally every state was experiencing horribly cold weather, and so I didn't leave Florida till that thing went away. So I spent some extra time there, and then when I got to my mom's, of course, I spent 6 weeks there, so that was much longer than I had planned. And so at the last leg, I was only staying in each state, camping for 3-4 days.
What part of each horseback ride did you paint?
Excuse me?
Which part, like when you would get on your horse to ride, would you do a painting before you rode or after you rode, or when you were taking a break because you painted in each of the locations?
Oh, I worked in the trailer from photographs that I'd taken. It's really hard to paint a horse because they don't ever stand completely still.
Right.
So I took tons and tons of pictures, which I posted on my blog, and then I'd pick my favorite one and work from a photograph in the trailer.
So tell me about the purpose of it, that your therapist agreed would be therapeutic. How does that provide therapy? How does your 48 state your long time, how did that provide therapy? What did it do for you?
That's a complicated answer. I had left thinking that the horses were going to heal me. I was involved with EGALA therapy. I want to be an actual person that facilitates that, and so there's a healing element to being around a 1,000-pound animal that lets you get on their back and control where they're putting their feet. The other thing I was hoping was that being in the wilderness, because I was camping in the wilderness most of the time, that being in the mountains and being in nature, there's some kind of peace that can be transformed to you. And I also think that when you look at the trees and the ground and the sky, and it's really hard to say, hey, this is just an accident. Somebody made all this. There's some order to this universe, and those things did definitely impact me. But the women that I met along the way had the biggest impact on me. I met women everywhere. People would seek me out because they're like, oh my gosh, this woman's here all by herself. Let's ask her over for dinner, or let's ask her to go for a ride with us. So I would get a lot of invitations like that, sit around the campfire and talk about things that women talk about, their children, their lives, their problems. And I would hear their stories of how they would get through things, of horrible shit that had happened, that had happened to them in their lives, and how they had recovered, and they were inspiring to me, and they would tell me that I was inspiring to them, go traveling around the country. To me, the traveling around the country was easy compared to the recovery from the emotional problems. So it was a two-way street. And these women also offered to pray for me, which was completely new to me. No one had ever asked me that before. And by the time I got to Florida, I started going to a church, and I did get baptized there, and things definitely got better after that.
Can you talk about that just a little more? How did your religious beliefs change, if at all?
Completely different. I was raised Catholic. I'd never read the Bible. I went to church when it was in Latin. I didn't know anything about God. And I had walked away from God as a teenager, didn't reconnect with him again in the Catholic sense until I had children. And then I had some serious problems with one of my kids, and that caused a huge battle with my husband over I wanted to put him in the hospital. He was suicidal, and get him treatment, and my husband was anti-psychiatry. And I totally walked away from God at that point. So when I started back to church, it was actually the month before I left. My daughter invited me to her church. It was a completely different experience. First of all, it was in English. Second of all, they did read the Bible, and they did explain how what the message was in the Bible, that how you would relate something that was written thousands of years ago to today. Right. And the music, the Christian rock music, I listened to it in the truck all the time. I spent a lot of time in the truck hauling between states. I find that music extremely inspiring and uplifting. And so I learned about a God that loves us, that cares about us, that wants us to be happy, that wants us to prosper, which was the polar opposite of what I had been taught as a child. Is that, you kept a list of my sins in my nightstand drawer so that when I was dragged to confession on Friday, I made sure I didn't forget any of them, because if you forgot a sin in confession, you went straight to hell. And it was a very punitive view of God, and that is not the God that I worship.
When you and the women that you met were speaking, were there any similarities in the beginning of their relationships that they might have recognized as red flags that this relationship would be abusive?
No. A lot of the stories that I heard that were so sad and inspirational to me had more to do with their children and trials with their children. But there was one woman that I met that had left an abusive husband, and she, at that point in time, said that she was caring for him now. He was an invalid, and she was his sole caregiver. And I was like, oh my God, how can you do that?
Wow.
Because this whole idea of forgiveness would come up constantly. I was so resentful of my husband. He did this to me. It preoccupied my mind all the time. And I had always looked at, people that would say anything about forgiveness. I was like, forget it. I'm never forgiving him. There's no excuse for what he did to me. And that's not what forgiveness is about. But so talking to that woman was extremely helpful for me to see that it's not about saying what they did to you is okay or excusing it in any way at all. It's about letting go of your resentment and bitterness and hatred out of your heart so that you can go on and enjoy life, because you can't enjoy life with those feelings.
No, you can't. You really can't.
I went to the blog page for those who want to see it. It's I don't know if you have to do the HTTP, but I'm just going to read it this way. https://SHLEP.blog. And you've got a lot of beautiful photographs and some photographs of your paintings on here. How did you actually get to paint a horse in every state?
I did. I worked on small masonite panels while I was on the road. They were less than a foot square that I'd cut up before I left on the trip. And then when I got back, settled down, I started doing all the paintings over in a larger format in oils. So the little square ones are, like I said, they're probably about 11 inches square, and those are acrylics. And then if you see any images that are rectangular, those would be the oils.
Oh my, you're amazing.
Kathy, you've held us spellbound the whole time. I have a copy of the book SHLEP. If one of our listeners would like it, give us a call, 622-9622. I found it on Amazon, SHLEP, and the blog is SHLEP.blog. You have to put https:// first. You probably knew that already. Most people do. Kathy, and one more question. Do you have a website in addition to the blog site?
No, I don't.
Okay.
And my daughter, who's in advertising, tells me I really need to do my website over, but I'm technically challenged.
Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back.
Fox News, I'm Chris Foster. The rough transcript of a July phone call between President Trump and Ukraine's new president's been released. In it, Fox's Catherine Herridge reports President Trump asked Vladimir Zelensky to have Joe Biden and his son investigate over Hunter Biden's work for a company they're saying.
There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the process